You are using her invention wrong every single day. You treat Wi-Fi and Bluetooth as magic switches on a plastic box. You blame your router when the signal drops. You curse your headphones when they glitch. You think the problem is speed or provider or this cheap hardware. It isn't. The real problem was solved in 1942 by a woman Hollywood refused to take seriously. And the way we use her idea now misses the one thing she actually saw. It was never about power. It was about refusing to sit still. In this episode, I'm going to walk you through 7 parts of a story the tech world still tells wrong. Part 3 is where the Navy made the worst decision. Part 5 is the one that rewrites what you think Wi-Fi is built on. Part 7 will change how you look at every genius story you've heard in tech. And at the end, I'll give you a simple test you can run on any future technology to see whether it's built on real engineering or on marketing. Do not scroll. Let this sit for a second. In 1942, a Hollywood studio was pushing one of its stars on America as the most beautiful woman in the world. Posters, magazine covers, carefully lit stills. That summer, the United States Patent Office granted her something the studio never mentioned even once. Patent number 2,292,387. A secret radio system designed to stop the enemy from jamming Allied torpedoes. Hollywood sold the face, the Patent Office stamped the mind, and the Navy took one look at the movie star's blueprint and filed it in a drawer. Stop here, because that single drawer is the entire hinge of this story. Years before that drawer, she was sitting at dinner tables where nobody expected her to be listening. Her name was Hedy Lamarr. Before that, Hedy Kiesler. She had married Friedrich Mandl, one of the richest men in Austria. Mandl owned munitions factories that armed the fascist governments rising across Europe. He was controlling, jealous, and he took her everywhere, including business dinners where generals, engineers, and arms buyers came to talk weapons. It looked like a social life. It was an education. She had grown up the daughter of a Vienna bank director who could not pass a streetcar or a printing press without explaining how it worked. So while the men traded technical talk, she was the one silently taking it apart in her head. One problem kept surfacing: the problem of controlling torpedoes by radio. A radio-guided torpedo could be steered onto its target, but the enemy could find the control frequency and jam it, flood it with noise, send the weapon harmlessly off course. This was cutting-edge, largely secret technology, and she was learning it not from textbooks, but from the men who built and sold it. It mattered emotionally because she wasn't supposed to be there. In their minds, she was decoration. In reality, she was a recorder. In a few years, she would understand exactly what those dinners had been teaching her. In 1937, she got out. She left Mandl. She reached Paris, then London, where the head of MGM signed her and handed her the screen name that would make her one of the most recognizable faces in the world, Hedy Lamarr. Hollywood sold the face. The part of her that had sat through torpedo briefings disappeared from the story. That's the first part you need to feel, because every time a system reduces a person to one trait, beautiful, charming, funny, compliant, it cuts off everything else they might give. And in this case, it cut off a defense system that took 2 decades to repair. By 1940, the problem she had absorbed across those tables had a deadline. The war was on. Allied ships were being sunk. The torpedo jamming weakness was no longer interesting dinner talk. It was a live military failure. That year, at a party in Hollywood, she met George Antheil, an avant-garde composer whose most notorious piece, Ballet Mécanique, called for a bank of player pianos and propellers to fire in perfect unison. He had spent years wrestling with the problem of getting mechanical instruments to stay in sync. It had mostly beaten him. On paper, they had nothing in common. In practice, his failure was the missing piece she needed. Because keeping multiple machines in perfect timing was exactly the mechanical problem behind her torpedo idea. Следующий пункт объясняет, как их странный союз превратился в то, что сегодня сидит внутри твоего роутера. What the two of them came up with is the part that still gets misunderstood today. The weakness in a radio-guided torpedo was simple. It listened on one fixed frequency. So an enemy could find that frequency and flood it with noise, drowning out the steering commands. Their fix was brutally elegant. Stop sitting still. If the torpedo and the ship controlling it both change frequency constantly, hopping together in the same secret pattern, then anyone listening on a single channel would only ever catch a fraction of a second of the signal before it jumped somewhere else. You cannot jam a channel you cannot predict. Picture two people holding a conversation across a crowded room while switching languages every few words on a schedule only they know. Anyone eavesdropping hears noise. That is the emotional translation of what they built. The hard part was keeping both ends on the same schedule. That is where the composer's expertise came in. They proposed coordinating the hops with a mechanism like a player piano roll punched with the pattern. Two identical rolls, one in the ship and one in the torpedo, would advance in lockstep and walk both radios through the same sequence of frequencies at the same instant. So the link stayed connected while an eavesdropper heard only fragments. It was a strange, almost musical solution to a military problem. In 1941, they specified up to 88 frequencies in the patent, a direct nod to the 88 keys on a piano. They filed it under her married name, Hedy Lamarr, alongside Antheil. In August 1942, the Patent Office granted patent 2,292,387, a secret communication system. On paper, they had invented frequency hopping.
Не листай дальше. Дай этому осесть.
She could have stopped at the patent, gone back to the studio, continued being the pretty face. She didn't. She offered the whole thing to the U.S. Navy, expecting they would build it. The Navy shelved it. The official reason was technical. The player piano mechanism was too bulky and too fragile to survive inside a torpedo. There was some engineering truth in that, but the reception had another layer. A movie star and a composer were not what the Navy pictured when they imagined weapons inventors. Because Lamarr was not yet a U.S. citizen, the government classified her patent as enemy alien property and effectively seized it. She had fled a fascist arms manufacturer. She had handed the Allies a way to protect their own weapons. The reward was to have the idea taken from her on a paperwork technicality. I know what you're thinking. If it was that good, surely someone would have tested it anyway. Here's why that didn't happen. Because the system did not have a slot for her. It had a slot for what she looked like. Instead of testing the device, the Navy suggested she help the war effort in a way more suited to her image. She sold war bonds. She was extraordinary at it, raising around $25 million over a tour through 16 cities in 10 days. Real money for the war. It was also the exact swap this story turns on. The country was happy to put the most beautiful woman in the world to work selling bonds. It could not imagine putting her patent to work. The patent expired in 1959, the same year Antheil died. Neither of them ever earned a cent from it. If the story ended in that drawer, she would be a footnote. The actress with the strange hobby. It doesn't end there, because engineers eventually came back to the idea. The Navy shelved the idea. That should have been the end. Instead, it became the beginning. For years, Hedy Lamarr's patent sat where so many good ideas sit when the system is not ready for them. Filed, ignored, sleeping in silence. Then engineers came back to the problem. Because the problem never went away. If anything, it got worse. By the late 1950s, radio systems were getting more crowded, not less. The military still needed secure communication. Civilian electronics were growing. The air was filling up with more signals, more interference, more chances for someone to listen, jam, or break the link. The world had moved on. The idea had not. Engineers at Sylvania picked up the concept and rebuilt it with transistors instead of paper rolls. Now the system could be made smaller, sturdier, more practical. By the early 1960s, transistorized frequency hopping systems had entered U.S. military use. The secure communications idea finally ran on hardware small enough to matter. And here is the part that should make you pause. The women and man who saw the future first were not the ones who got credit when the future finally arrived. That happens all the time. A solution is too early, then it becomes obvious, then somebody else gets paid. This is the third turning point. The patent stopped being just a patent. It became a family of ideas, a broad method, a way of thinking about wireless that says, if you cannot defend one channel, stop living in one channel. Spread the signal. Move the signal. Refuse to let it sit still long enough to be trapped. That instinct is what modern wireless owes her. Now I need to correct something that gets repeated too casually. People often say she invented Wi-Fi. That's not the cleanest truth. The real story is better. Her patent gave the world the core spread spectrum mindset. That broke into two major branches. One is frequency hopping, the idea she and Antheil patented. The signal jumps between channels in a set pattern. The other is direct sequence spread spectrum, a different method that spreads a signal across a wider band using a code. Today's Wi-Fi and GPS mostly use that second branch. So if someone says she invented Wi-Fi in the literal engineering sense, that's too simple. But if someone says she helped make the wireless world possible, that is absolutely true. I know what you might be thinking. Okay, but if Wi-Fi doesn't directly use her exact system, why does this story matter? Here's why. Because technology is not just one patent. It is a chain of ideas, and she was one of the people who saw the chain early. The first Wi-Fi standard in 1997 actually did include a frequency hopping mode before the industry shifted more fully to the other branch. Bluetooth still uses frequency hopping almost exactly the way she and Antheil described it. It splits the 2.4 GHz band into 79 channels and hops between them roughly 1,600 times a second to stay ahead of interference. That means the idea they filed in 1941 is alive in the devices you carry every day. Your earbuds, your keyboard, your phone accessories, all of it quietly dancing between channels. And the scale is enormous. The Bluetooth Trade Group expects more than 5 billion Bluetooth devices to ship in a single year, every one of them hopping frequencies. Think about that. Millions of people hear a click and call it convenience. What they are really hearing is a war problem from the 1940s, refined into consumer electronics. There is one more layer. GPS and older cellular systems lean on the sibling method, direct sequence, spreading each signal thin across a wide band with a pseudo-random code instead of hopping. The phone in your hand is usually running both branches at once, Bluetooth hopping, GPS spreading. A system built from ideas that started as a way to keep torpedoes from being jammed. That is the emotional translation. Every time your earbuds connect, your car unlocks, or your keyboard talks to your laptop without a wire, you are living inside a solution a Hollywood studio never bothered to understand. The recognition came late. In 1997, more than half a century after that drawer, the Electronic Frontier Foundation gave Lamarr and Antheil a Pioneer Award. Her reported reaction was 3 words: "It's about time." That sentence should hurt a little, because it says everything about how the system treated her. Not "we knew," not "we valued you," just late acknowledgement. She died in January 2000 at 85. The honors arrived after that. Posthumous induction into the National Inventors Hall of Fame in 2014. A Google Doodle in 2015 that introduced a new generation to the patent behind the face. The studio that called her the most beautiful woman in the world was right about the marketing and wrong about the woman. And the market was wrong about the invention. Here's the free tool from this story. Whenever someone tells you a person isn't technical, stop and ask, what can they see that the experts around them are missing? That's the real lesson here. Lamarr was not trained in electrical engineering the way the men in the room were, but she could see systems, incentives, weakness, and timing. She understood that if one frequency could be found, it could be jammed. She understood that if both ends could hop together, the enemy lost its grip. You can use that question on yourself today. What hidden pattern are you seeing early that other people are dismissing because it doesn't fit their image of you? That is often where the real value lives. But this is only part of the system, because the question is powerful, but it is not enough by itself. To really use this story, you need the bigger framework, how to spot when a forgotten idea is about to return. how to tell whether a dead technology still solves a live problem, and how to avoid missing the next Lamarr moment because of your own assumptions. That's what I packaged into the full system. Everything together, the historical map, the recognition patterns, the practical questions, is here. Link in the description, but stay because the next part is the most important. In the final section, we're going to use this story to look forward, because the next buried technology is already out there, and once you see the pattern, you'll realize it's not the last time the world will laugh at an idea before building the future on top of it. The real shock in this story is not that she was ignored, it's that the thing she saw is now everywhere. Every time your earbuds connect, every time your car unlocks, every time your laptop finds a mouse or keyboard without a wire. You are watching a system behave exactly the way she imagined it should. Not because the world suddenly became smarter, because the underlying problem never changed. Wireless is crowded, always has been, always will be. And the only reason it feels easy now is that the system learned to refuse to sit still. That is the deeper emotional truth of this episode. Hedy Lamarr did not just invent a clever trick for torpedoes. She saw a principle. If a channel can be found, it can be attacked. If it can be attacked, it should move. If it moves in a pattern only the two ends know, it becomes much harder to kill. That instinct did not die in the 40s. It became infrastructure. Let's make it concrete. A modern Bluetooth link uses frequency hopping across 79 channels in the 2.4 GHz band. It changes channels roughly 1,600 times per second to stay ahead of interference. That's not just a technical fact. That is a living echo of a patent a studio ignored because it came from the wrong person. And the scale is staggering. More than 5 billion Bluetooth devices are expected to ship in a single year. Every one of them is proof that the drawer was wrong. Not just morally wrong, technically short-sighted. I know what you might be thinking. Okay, but this is still just a niche part of wireless, right? Here's why that's not true. Because frequency hopping is only one branch of the family. The broader idea, spread spectrum, shaped the way we think about secure, resilient wireless at every level. GPS, cellular systems, Wi-Fi history, short-range devices, industrial links, medical gear, the entire ecosystem is built around the same refusal to let a signal sit naked in one place. Now zoom out. What made the original patent so powerful was not the piano roll. It was the mental model. The signal should not be predictable. The channel should not be easy to capture. The link should feel dynamic from the outside, but perfectly synced inside. That is how modern wireless survives in a world full of noise. And that idea shows up far beyond Bluetooth. It shows up in network design, in satellite links, in secure industrial systems, in the way engineers think about jamming, congestion, and reliability. The pattern is larger than the patent, which is exactly why the patent still matters. This is the sixth turning point. The invention stops being a historical oddity and becomes a lens for everything that came after it. If you want a second free tool from this story, here it is. Whenever a technology is mocked as too early, ask what part of the system is missing, the idea or the hardware to make it real. Lamarr and Antheil had the idea. The hardware was not ready. That's why the patent sat in a drawer for years. And that's why people keep getting history wrong. They confuse not buildable yet with not valuable. Those are very different things. So when you evaluate a new technology today, do not ask only whether it works now. Ask whether it is early, incomplete, or just waiting for the right hardware and the right scale. That question alone can save you from dismissing the future too soon. But this is only part of the system, because one good question does not make a framework. It just opens the door. The bigger system is about learning to identify the buried invention before it becomes obvious to everyone else. It is about seeing when history is about to repeat in a new material, a new market, or a new device. And that is exactly what I built this series around. If you want the full structure, I've packaged it into one place, the map of how old ideas become new infrastructure. The test for spotting ignored innovations. the way to read tech history forward instead of backward. Everything together, the full system, is here. Link in the description, but stay because the next part is the most important. Because now I want to show you the pattern in a different place. Not in radio, not in war, in the way society treats people who see too far ahead. The next buried technology is not a circuit, it's a decision system. A way of deciding which voices count and which ones get filed away. And the internal lesson from this story is brutal. If you let image overrule insight, you bury the future before it arrives. That mistake is still happening today. In rooms with brighter lights, in industries with bigger budgets, in meetings where someone is probably being underestimated right now because they do not look like the person in charge. So here is the final question. If the most important signal in the room is coming from someone everyone is underestimating, are you smart enough to hear it? Because that, more than anything, is what this story is really about. Final comment 1. Number from 1 to 7, which part of Hedy Lamarr's story hit you hardest? 1. The dinner table education. 2. The torpedo problem. 3. The player piano solution. 4. The Navy shelving the patent. 5. The Bluetooth connection today. 6. The late recognition. 7. The lesson about being underestimated. Send this to one person you know who gets dismissed because of how they look, talk, or present themselves. One share could remind them that insight does not always arrive in the expected package. And next week, I'm showing you a power system from the 1930s, plus an internal document that proves they knew where it would fail, but built it anyway. That story is even more dangerous because the consequences still live in your wall sockets today. Stay with me.